You're probably asking yourself, why am I doing chapter readings of the 9/11 Commission Report, chapter readings of the Gerald Shea Memorandum, or chapter readings of the Joint House Inquiry? Are we supposed to just take the government's word, or do we just say that the government can't be trusted? And the problem with this line of thinking is that you don't analyze the data. And when you don't analyze the data, you can't responsibly or critically label the data as either true or false. If you don't listen to what one side is saying, then how can you possibly make an opinion or draw a conclusion about something that you didn't research? For years, the 9/11 Truth Movement has fallen under the spell of conspiracy. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. I believe in certain conspiracies myself. However, the 9/11 Truth Movement fell under the fringe areas of conspiracy, unfortunately. And there are many people who basically looked at 9/11 and made up their decision in saying that certain aspects of the American government are involved, that the Israeli intelligence are involved, that the Saudis may have been involved, but maybe they're patsies. But people like Richard Gage and Jason Burmis and Rebecca Roth and Christopher Bolin and Jim Fetzer and Alex Jones have repeatedly over and over the years told you the ultimate point in where the problem lies in the 9/11 Truth Movement is that the official narrative is false. You may have heard me over the years say, can you explain what the official narrative is? Because from my experience in dealing with certain truthers over the years on viral media, is that the official narrative always varies. But it comes down to a basic understanding, and it's very basic. To them, the 9/11 official narrative is that 19 Islamic fundamentalists who hate our freedoms basically hijacked 4 planes, in which 2 of them crashed into the World Trade Center, 1 crashed into the Pentagon, and 1 crashed in a field in Shanksville, while World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7 came down by pre-planted explosives. I'm sorry, 1, 2, and 7 came down by natural progression from fires. That's what they believe the official narrative represents. It's a very narrow view of 9/11, but that's basically the gist of it. Not realizing that this is not even the beginning aspects of the pre-9/11 motive period or after. They're stuck basically on the day itself, or as I say, they're stuck at ground zero. And this is not the way to investigate 9/11. If you basically made up your mind before you even investigated the crime of 9/11 and said that the federal government's involved, you're only going to look at information that acquiesces to that worldview. If you say that the Israelis are the ones who are involved with 9/11, you're only going to look at information that agrees to this point. You're not going to read the 9/11 Commission Report. You're not going to read the Joint House Inquiry. So in other words, you're no longer an investigator. I would call you a hobbyist or a very biased researcher, and I use that term lightly, in terms of only looking at information that agrees with your train of thought. And one of the reasons why I made viral media, because I saw this predominant problem within the 9/11 spectrum online. And you can find these people everywhere. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, Rumble, YouTube, or what's left of them. All forms. They even wrote books about it. But they wrote books that were slanted with bias and prejudice and missing a great deal because they didn't read information that they think is agreeable to the worldview or to the official narrative. Because a slew of self-appointed experts basically told them not to read it. Well, how can you say that the 9/11 Commission report is false if you never read it? How can you look at the Joint House Inquiry report and basically say, well, it agrees with the official narrative, so I'm not going to read it? Then how can you critique it? You can't. So what I basically did was look at 9/11 like an investigator would. You come to the crime scene, you see a crime, and you conduct the 6 steps of the scientific method. What am I talking about? Well, here are 6 steps to the scientific method that everybody should do. And it's not just for 9/11, but it goes for any human event in history, any crime scene, any test, any hypothesis. 1, asking a question about something you observe. Let's take the Pentagon, for example, since it's the most divisive issue regarding 9/11. Asking a question about what you observe. Did a plane crash into the Pentagon? Let's start with that question. The next step is doing background research to learn what is already known about the topic. All right. Well, let's ask the people who were there, eyewitnesses. What did they see? Let's take a look at the physical evidence. Is there any plane debris? Is there any radar data showing a plane taking off out of Dulles and crashing into a building like the Pentagon? Is there any forensic data, such as human remains that were found that fits the profile of the passengers and crew on board Flight 77? 3, constructing a hypothesis. Does the evidence match with the data that is found on the site, and also with the eyewitnesses and the technical and logistical analytical data? All right. Are the eyewitnesses compromised? Are they agents? Are they threatened to agree with this narrative? How can we test it? Well, if, say, a good amount of these people are agents, well, then we can have data that shows this. Do we have data showing one eyewitness is a government operative? Do we have data about one eyewitness who is being forced to say what he says? If not, then why is it basically being in this train of field? Why are we entertaining this if we can't show evidence for it? Is the analytical data compromised, such as the radar satellite data? Can we show this? If not, why are we entertaining it? Is the analytical data, the forensic data, showing that the human remains of passengers or crew were planted on site? No? Then why are we entertaining this data? So constructing a hypothesis based upon the evidence analytically, technically, logistically, physical, and eyewitness data all agrees with the narrative that American Flight 77 took off out of Dulles and crashed into the Pentagon. Now, next step is experimenting to test the hypothesis. For example, like I said, does the analytical data match with the plane taking off out of Dulles and crashing into the Pentagon? Well, since we cannot show that the data is compromised and that this data that we received from the radar satellite shows without question, because you tested it, shows that, yes, American Airlines Flight 77 took off out of Dulles. The eyewitnesses at the airport show this. The analytical data shows this. The technical data shows this. And of course, the physical debris matching Flight 77, which is found at the crash site, shows this. The forensic data of the human remains of passengers and crew, which was analyzed by Dover Medical Facility, show that, yes, this was not planted, since we can't show that, and that it was left all throughout the first floor of the Pentagon. 5, analyzing the data from the experiment and drawing conclusions. So, if the data, which is run through the testing, through the scientific method's initial points, meet up with the evidence, well, then I can only draw the conclusion that American Airlines Flight 77 took off out of Dulles and crashed into the Pentagon. This is the only method that works. There is no other alternative because I feel that this matches with the official narrative, and I can't agree with it because I was told by self-appointed experts in the truth movement that we should not believe in the official narrative. If you already have it in your head that the American government's involved, then you are basically saying that all the evidence and all the analytical data, all the technical data, all the forensic data in which I cannot show was manipulated has to be ignored. But then you aren't basically being honest in your assessment. So the data matches with the evidence. And 6, communicating the results to others, showing the data to the public, to society, telling them this is exactly what happened through the evidence that was collected and that was scrutinized under the 6 steps of the scientific method. So this is the reason why I do chapter readings. For example, today I did a chapter within the 9/11 Commission report analyzing the 9/11 Commission reports on the Hamburg cell, in which I read the entire chapter of that subsection within chapter 5. But I also made a point to where I said that certain points of this subsection of the chapter is false, because the data that we know now instead of back then shows that this one section, not all of it, but certain parts of it, is wrong. How do I know that? Because I analyzed the data showing that Mohamedou Al-Slahi, who the 9/11 Commission report stated in 2004 was the Al-Qaeda facilitator who met with Ramzi bin al-Shibh on 9/11, when the 9/11 masterminds alleged, had met with members of the Hamburg cell and told them to go to Afghanistan and meet with bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, in which they were involved with the planes operation afterwards. But with all that data, basically now shown as false, without Slahi in the story, well, there's a big hole there. How can we make the Hamburg cell of Muhammad Atta, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Marwan al-Shehhi, and Ziad Jarrah, these are the pilot hijackers and one facilitator, how can we make that jump from Hamburg, Germany, to the meeting with Al-Qaeda hierarchy in Afghanistan, now that the connector, Mohammed al-Slahi, is no longer in the picture? So that's how you analyze data, and that's how you show that certain parts of the 9/11 Commission report as false or incorrect. Now, I'm not saying that all of the 9/11 Commission report is wrong, because it's not. It's not all wrong. For example, the attacks happened on September 11, 2001. Now, I'm being quite contrite here, and tedious, but also I'm correct in the technicality of it. The 9/11 Commission report is not completely false. It is an incomplete report. They did not add in the Able Danger Program. It did not add the Gerald Shea Memorandum. And also the new information that was covered up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation involving the Saudi government and the CIA running a covert operation inside the United States. That came out later through Operation Encore, which was an FBI investigation, and also through the Canestraro documents, in which Donald Canestraro from the Office of Military Commissions interviewed anonymously certain people within the CIA, FBI, and the 9/11 Commission regarding this illegal operation involving the CIA and Saudi intelligence. On to Al-Qaeda operatives who were involved with the hijacking of Flight 77, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. So this is the reason why I'm doing chapter readings of certain important documents. If we're going to say what is true and what is false, we have to know about both sides or multiple sides of the issue. The 9/11 Commission basically is showing a narrative that is very incomplete. Did they make up certain parts of the story? Some parts, yes, but some parts they didn't. Remember, there was a lot of information they uncovered. Over 1 million documents were read. But also, there are over 1 million documents and probably more that are classified, that was not shown to them. So it's not like they didn't have a choice in the matter, considering who was the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, which is Philip Zelikow, who is part of the State Department, as well as officials within the intelligence services not telling the whole truth. Same thing for the Joint House Inquiry. Joint House Inquiry was a little bit more narrower in their investigation, but they expanded on the domestic intelligence agencies, the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI, as well as INS, local police, involved with pre-intelligence and also during the day of 9/11. It's not that I agree with this official narrative, whatever that is that I'm trying to educate and properly respond and report to the public, in which this should have been done in 2002, 2003 by the 9/11 Truth Movement. You would think that as a truth movement, they are involved with only sharing what? The truth, the evidence, wherever it leads, not to wherever you feel it leads to. And so this is the reason why people like Richard Gage and Christopher Bolin and Barbara Honegger and Rebecca Roth and Jason Burmis and Alex Jones and Jim Fetzer and Oli Damagard and countless others, Dave Von Kleist, Dylan Avery, and many, many others, are not relevant anymore. And for the very few that are, they're hanging on by a thread because they don't learn anything new. They regurgitate old theories that are proven false, but they can only repeat themselves time and time again before they lose their own audience and they want to learn something new. But the things that are coming out now, the information that's coming in now, contradicts their own views because they're narrow and disproven and faulty and inaccurate. Information like Operation Encore or the Canestraro document. They're not going to know anything about it because they don't think the hijackers are important. And if you don't think the hijackers are important, that means the intelligence services, domestic and foreign, are ignored as well. Or that they'll have a very vague and expansive view and say that, well, they can do whatever they want, whatever that means, without ever getting caught if you're investigating whatever that means. But there are people out there who are investigating whatever that means. And they're finding that specific items not known to people like Richard Gage and others, and showing that this information, which wasn't reported by the commissions, and we're asking the right questions, while the others are not questioning at all. And so they'll retreat to the shadows of the abyss of the internet. Sure, they'll basically go on very alternative and very far-right podcasts and videos and interviews because they deal with that fringe mindset, the quasi-left, the very fringe right of politics that entertain this very fragmented and inaccurate worldview of 9/11. But ask them to go on reputable podcasts. Well, they can't because they're basically not going to have answers to the questions that they're going to have. And this is the reason why my channel here on YouTube and elsewhere will always have relevant information that caters to only the evidence and only the information. Why? Because I want the viewer, you, the public, to come away with a clear and unequivocal understanding of what happened on September 11, 2001, what happened before, what happened during, and what happened afterwards. How I feel about 9/11 is completely irrelevant. My biases, my prejudices have absolutely no compact, no relevancy to the investigation, to the information. I want to know the truth, nothing more. Why? Because I want to hold people accountable. And the only way to do this is to look at the information, to ascertain it, to investigate it, to run it through the scientific method, to test the hypothesis, to see what is true from what is false. Not what I feel to be true and not what I feel to be false. That means nothing. That's belief. I'm not interested in belief. I'm interested in knowledge and passing that knowledge to the public because I want the public to become strengthened with information, with knowledge. It's the only way we can hold people accountable. We cannot go to court and say, a plane didn't hit the Pentagon. The next question is, how do you know? Because there is no little plane debris. Now, how do you know? There was plane debris that was found. Well, it's smaller than expected. Well, can you show the hypothesis of a plane not in the Pentagon? There are no camera video, but we have eyewitnesses. They're all compromised. Can you prove it? No. I'll use a great example. April Gallup was an employee at the Pentagon who later on gave an interview to the U.S., to the Pentagon's historical office, in which she said that she was working inside the building, didn't see the plane crash, but heard an explosion. And when she was crawling through the debris, she fainted. Later on, she was taken advantage of by people who believed that no plane crashed in the Pentagon because they didn't go to the 100 other people that saw the plane from the outside. They went to her because she was inside and didn't see the plane. And not only that, she was manipulated by these people. And she felt she was wrong because she wasn't properly compensated for her injuries and time off. So she decided to go with people like Barbara Honegger and Richard Gage, the no-planers at the Pentagon. And they basically told her that you should expand on this theory. Not only that, she got some lawyers that were involved, but they didn't like that she was with these people. Nevertheless, she didn't shake them off. She went and sued the federal government, and it didn't stop there. In 2010, she sued George H.W. Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Richard Myers, And then later on, a couple of months after that, amended a lawsuit to include the following: Osama bin Laden and American Airlines, the two very entities that she initially claimed can't be involved. Because if Al-Qaeda is involved, that means they hijacked the planes. And if they hijacked the planes, they hijacked American Airlines plane, Flight 77. But she doesn't believe a plane hit the Pentagon. So why would she imply that bin Laden or Al-Qaeda or American Airlines is involved? Because she said this, that if the other theories are true, then I'm still a victim and I deserve compensation. Not only was her case thrown out of court, but she was hit with a frivolous lawsuit because she couldn't prove that a plane didn't hit the Pentagon. Because the overwhelming evidence was that American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked and it crashed into the Pentagon. She was never heard of since. It's 12 years later, and April Gallup is in the shadows. If she had a countersuit, she never filed. And she was forgotten, not just by history, but by the very people who took advantage of her. Yes, once in a while they'll use her name. Regretfully, she ever met these people. As for the eyewitnesses who saw the plane, well, they were ignored by the truth movement because they cannot come to grips that the official narrative, some parts of it just might be right. Because for years, they were told that the official narrative has to be opposed and it's wrong. And that any other view, no matter how irrational it is, would rather be accepted than to agree with the official narrative, even if it's borderline asinine, borderline nuts. And this is one of the reasons why the 9/11 truth movement has been an outright and utter failure. Today, they're almost non-existent. When was the last time you heard of any of the people I mentioned, and those I didn't mention, ever come out with new videos, ever come out with new information? They're nowhere to be found. Nowhere. They're not even writing books anymore. They simply disappeared. And the only people left standing are the people who only go by the data, who only go by the evidence, who only read new information because that's what's going to come out. New information, unclassified documents. And for the people who don't read it, because they think the new documents are coming from an official narrative view, they're never going to learn anything new. So they'll never do anything new. They could just repeat an old narrative, an old theory, to the point where they're obsolete. So I would suggest to anybody out there, anybody new that is interested in 9/11, that you are to look at it from a blank slate. Go by the scientific method points that I outlined in this video, and that's how you'll reach a conclusion, no matter where you start. And so that'll be the end of this video. And I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.